Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are really pleased to be hosting this session on two of the most important pieces of upcoming cybersecurity legislation affecting UK organisations, the NIS2 Directive and the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill. Now, as the regulatory landscape continues to shift, it's becoming more important than ever for businesses to understand not just what's coming, but what it actually means and how to respond in a way that's both proportionate and practical to that. Today's session is designed to give you exactly that. So a clear, jargon-free overview of what these new regulations involve, how they align with existing UK laws, and what you can be doing now to strengthen your cyber resilience and stay ahead of future compliance obligations. And we'll also be exploring the practical steps your organisation can take to reduce risk and improve reporting, and how these changes may affect your strategic planning in the months ahead. As your cameras and mics are turned off by default, if you do have any questions along the way, please pop them into the Q&A box and we'll do our best to answer them in the session or at the end of the session. And with that, I'll hand over to Andy Cox, one of our Associate Technical Directors, who will be walking you through the upcoming regulations and what they mean for you. Andy, over to you.
Good morning, all. Thank you for joining us. As Isaac says, just for anyone here who's not an existing customer of ours, so very, very briefly, so ADM Computing, IT managed service provider, based down in Canterbury, in Kent. Sweet spot, probably companies with users between 25 up to 250 users. Broad number of industry sectors we cover, manufacturing, schools, business to business, financial services. As Isaac says, this is going to be a review of these two pieces of legislation that are in place or coming into place. Don't worry, I won't go into huge depths about Article 1.7 of this particular sub-paragraph of that law. There are hundreds and hundreds of pages out there to read if you really want to. Okay. But yeah, without further ado, we will crack on. So we're going to look at the overview of NIS2 and the UK Cyber Resilience Bill. Where do these apply? What the requirements are, and the management and penalties associated with these. It's worth pointing out that the regulatory requirements in the cyber security field are becoming a lot more stringent. But hopefully, as you'll see by the end of this, even if these regulations don't directly apply to your industry sector, I'm hoping you agree by the end of this that basically the requirements are all good practice and everything that we all should be doing within the cybersecurity environment. It's actually quite apt, this session being today, because we found out over the weekend that Ingram Micro, who are one of the biggest, if not the biggest IT services and services hardware provider in the world, were hit by a breach over the weekend, a ransomware breach. So very apt reminder that these things hit people, and our job as professionals in this environment is to make sure we mitigate those as far as we possibly can. Okay. So what is NIS2? So NIS2 is the Network and Information Security Directive version 2. It was introduced by the European Union. We'll get on to its equivalents and does it apply to the UK shortly. Introduced by the European Union, and it became effective in law from October 2024. So the objectives of NIS2: enhance cybersecurity across member states, protect critical infrastructure, and address increasing digital threats. So it's really about providing a joined up mechanism for managing cyber threats and how incidents are dealt with. So ensure security and resilience of essential services. An important thing here is that there is no certifying body, and that applies to the UK Cyber Resilience Bill as well. So you don't become certified in this. I don't know if there's any people in the call who have got ISO 27001 compliance for information security. There isn't an equivalent certification for this. ISO 27001 is a very, very huge step improving your compliance with these requirements. But we'll touch on that a little bit later on. Okay. Does NIS2 apply to the UK? So NIS2 is a comprehensive framework by the European Union. It's called a directive rather than a regulation, in that although it's enforced in law, it's very broad in that it tells you what you should be doing, but not how to do it. There's a large amount of self-interpretation of the requirements within here, which is why the existing certifications you have within the cybersecurity arena, things like ISO 27001 for information security, things like ISO 9001 for quality. Obviously, in the UK, we have Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. These will become increasingly important to demonstrate that you have compliance in this arena. Okay, so obviously, the UK is no longer an EU member state, so the NIS2 directive does not automatically apply to the UK, but we'll see some examples where it does shortly. So the UK is bringing in its own regulations broadly aligned with the NIS2 principles, and this is called the UK Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill. This was introduced in July 2024. It's anticipated to become law any point now, mid-2025, and we suspect it will be enforceable by 2026. So you have a bit of a run up to it, okay? Sectors covered by NIS2. So again, not every industry sector is covered by the requirements of this, similar with the UK Cyber Resilience Bill. The full details of the UK Cyber Resilience Bill hadn't yet been announced, but internally we're working very much, and the general consensus across the industry is that it's going to be broadly consistent with NIS2. So if you operate in any of these industry sectors, you could be required to comply with NIS2, and you could be required to comply with the UK Cyber Resilience Bill. So energy, drinking water, digital infrastructure. So digital infrastructure is managed service providers such as us, ADM Computing. So we have to comply with these. Health, banking, finance, transport. Space is an interesting one. I wouldn't imagine we've got anyone here who has a direct operation in the space industry, but you never know. Production, processing, distribution of food. I'm not going to finish reading them all off. You can see them there for yourself. So there's a lot of areas that it covers. Okay. It's further broken down, NIS2 is, and again, we suspect that the UK bill will be into essential and important entities. So as we can see here, essential entities are large organisations as defined in the directive. They have a minimum of 250 employees and an annual turnover above 50 million euros. Okay. Important entities are medium-sized entities in the specified sectors. Medium-sized enterprises have at least 50 employees or an annual turnover balance of 10 million euros. Again, I'm going to stress this, that even if you don't directly fit into these categories of essential and important entities, everything that is described within here is really cybersecurity best practice. So it is something that really everybody should be considering. Okay. So another difference between supervision of essential entities and supervision of important entities. So essential entities may be proactively supervised by the appropriate government authorities. So there may be annual audits required, all that sort of thing. Important entities are subject to reactive supervision. So that's monitoring and auditing in response to incidents and complaints. So the key areas which apply to NIS2 and the UK equivalent, we're just going to go through those now. So the first one is governance. So you're going to get bored with me saying this. I'm stressing this. This is all fundamental cybersecurity best practice. Just because you don't feel your organization fits into one of the descriptions in here, please don't think you don't need to think about this. You do need to think about it because it's best practice everybody should be complying with. Okay, so governance. There should be a responsible person within the organization who has the director level responsibility for cybersecurity within the organization. And that person is responsible for overseeing an organization's cybersecurity strategy and the development and implementation of a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy. So again, if there is any organizations within this call who have got ISO 27001, this is nothing new. We have ISO 27001 for information security and 9001 for quality. And this is all enshrined within that. So we have responsible person at director level, responsible for cybersecurity. We have a cybersecurity strategy, and we have developed and we implement and we review our strategy.
We've had a question come in, just asking if it covers education. The resilience bill, I'm assuming, is the reference there.
Yep. So what we will see, if we just go back up here, we've got public administration, so public sector. So yes, it does cover education. Is that okay?
Great, thank you.
So the next area is business continuity. So business continuity and DR. So you should have plans within your organization to ensure the continuity of essential services. How do you maintain operations if you are hit by a cyber attack, if you get critical data compromised by a ransomware attack? Okay. Disaster recovery. How quickly can you restore normal operations? How long will it take you to get back into operation? And again, this is all dependent 100% on the organization. There is nothing within any of these regulations that will say you as company A, if you are hit by a disaster, that you have to be back up and operational within X amount of time. It's something that is specific to each organization. And I tend to use two key metrics for this, which are absolutely nothing to do with IT whatsoever. And they are what's called the RTO, which is your recovery time objective, and the RPO, which is your recovery point objective. So the first one, recovery time objective, how long after an incident or a disaster will you be back in operation? Okay, so it could be, it's going to take X amount of time to restore your backups. It's going to take X amount of time to go and find new hardware, for example. Now, what that time will be dependent on the company. And, that is driven by the company. How long can the company continue functioning without these key systems available? Okay, so that's the recovery time objective. The recovery point objective is once you have your services and your systems back in operation, how up to date are they? So as an example, let's say you have an on-premise server that is running your financial system. Okay, so that server gets hit by a ransomware attack. Okay, and you come in tomorrow morning and that server is not functioning. So you go to your DR plan, okay? And your DR plan, the first thing is, right, okay, we can restore that server from last night's backup. So you go in, you restore last night's backup. Yep, last night's server backup. The server is up and operational. So you could say, well, okay, we've got that server restored within 2 hours. But if you're operating 24/7, because that was from last night's backup, you could have lost potentially 8, 10, 12 hours of information. So the recovery point objective is how up to date you are once you're back. Not going to go into any more detail in that. It's a whole other subject, but it's just an illustration of the sort of things that you need to think about. Security measures. Again, nothing in here should be a surprise because it's all best practice. Yeah, we should all be doing this. So access control. How do you control who accesses your network and your information systems? Within this, we're talking about things like, obviously, we all have usernames and passwords. Yeah. I would hope that everyone here is using multi-factor authentication. And again, dependent on how critical your sector is and how critical that data is, you may well go beyond that with things that we have in Microsoft 365, such as conditional access. So even if your username, your password, your multi-factor authentication all work, if you're not logging in from an approved device, it won't allow you to. Okay, so it's all this stuff everyone should be doing. Encryption, protect data in transit and at rest. Again, this falls into the area of GDPR as well. So within GDPR, it basically says that if you are transmitting information about an individual that contains personally identifiable information, things like names, addresses, credit card numbers, details, national insurance numbers, you should take all reasonable precautions to ensure that that information is protected. Okay. Now, much like these requirements, GDPR doesn't tell you what you should do or how you should do it. Sorry, it tells you you need to take all reasonable precautions. It doesn't say you should be encrypting it or you should be password protecting all your documents. It's all down to you to interpret that. And a lot of that is dependent on the risk level of the information. Okay. Network security. How do you protect your network? If you have on-premise infrastructure, have you got firewalls protecting the on-premise infrastructure? Are those firewalls up to date? How are they maintained? If, as is increasingly common now, you have a hybrid working environment where people are working from home, how are their devices protected when they're working from home? Do you allow them to use personal devices, or are they only allowed to access your critical resources via a company device? Okay. So security measures, again, none of this should be new. Monitoring and logging. So continuous monitoring. So ongoing monitoring of network and information systems, detect and respond to threats, collection and analysis of logs, and identify and investigate incidents. Now, a lot of this, you could argue, well, ADM do our IT. Are you doing this? And yes, we have systems that do this if you bought into those systems. But again, if you're not a customer of ours or you haven't bought into these sorts of systems, worth bearing in mind that what we are finding now is outside the realm of these legal requirements. This monitoring and logging requirement is increasingly becoming a requirement for cyber insurance. So what you may find is when your cyber insurance gets renewed, there may be a question in there, are you using a SIEM, SIEM system, security instant event monitoring? Okay. And they're increasingly wanting you to have these sorts of systems in place. Okay. Again, log management. Everything that happens within your network, everything that happens within 365, it's all logged depending on the level of logging you enable, how you're able to respond and investigate those logs if there is an incident. Okay. And again, it's perfectly reasonable for you to expect your third party to do this, your IT provider, but we need to make sure that your expectation ties in with our expectation and ties in with the systems that you have in place as well. Okay. This is becoming incredibly important, supply chain security. So this is one of the areas where if you are a UK organization, but you deal with the EU, this could directly affect you now, or potentially could affect you now. Okay. So supply chain security is basically ensuring that your suppliers have adequate cybersecurity posture. Okay. It's assessing your third-party vendors. Okay. It's developing policies that you use to state how you ensure that goods or services you are purchasing are secure. So one little example here. Okay. So people here who have got a support contract agreement with ADM. Okay, so we are a supplier to you. Okay, so it is perfectly reasonable, and we expect it for you to turn around and say, well, okay, ADM Computing, you say you have all these measures in place, prove it. Okay. And from our point of view, we can prove it by saying, okay, there is our ISO 9001 and ISO 27001 certification. They prove that we comply to these standards, and they prove that we're audited on a yearly basis to maintain those standards. Okay. How does this apply if you're a company in the UK and you supply the EU? So let's give an example of, let's say you're called Company A, yep, and you manufacture a very, very specialized widget, okay, and you sell hundreds and thousands of these widgets on a yearly basis to Volkswagen because you're in the automotive trade, okay? So you're a UK company in the automotive trade, and you sell a very important widget to Volkswagen. Volkswagen, and they could do this today if they wanted to, Volkswagen would be perfectly entitled to turn around to you and say, okay, we are now going to make it part of our contract with you when it comes to contract renewal, that if you wish to continue supplying hundreds of thousands of this very important widget, you need to demonstrate that you comply with the requirements of NIS2. Okay. This is really important. You're a UK company, but because you're operating in the EU, you can fall under the requirements of NIS2. And this will become more evident when the UK Cyber Resilience Bill comes in. So it's going to become really, really important for you to be able to demonstrate how you comply with these requirements. Okay. And we'll get onto that in a little bit with things like ISO and risk management and risk strategies, that sort of thing. But Volkswagen would be perfectly within their rights. If you wish to continue supplying them the very important widget, they would be perfectly within their rights to say, okay, you've said you've got all these mechanisms in place, we're going to audit you. And they can come in and they can audit your security policies. They can audit your security to make sure that you do indeed comply with their requirements. Okay. That audit would be down to them to arrange and pay. They can't make you pay for it. But it's important to realize that this is very likely to start becoming part of contractual negotiations in the future if you continue to work with EU companies. Okay. Unless possibly you are the only company in the world that can manufacture the super important widget. Okay, so that's really worth bearing in mind, and that is an example of how this can apply externally. Okay. Risk management, massively boring subject. Okay, but you have to demonstrate, or you will have to demonstrate, that you are assessing the risks of your environment. So, do you have plans to identify your risks? Do you have plans to mitigate against those? Okay. Incident management. If there is an incident, what do you do? Okay. Who do you report to? Okay. Timely reporting of significant incidents to relevant authorities. Now, as I'm sure everyone here is aware, under GDPR, if you have a data breach or a data compromise within the UK, you have to report that to the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, within 72 hours. Okay. Under the auspices of NIS2 and the UK Cyber Resilience Bill, if, for example, you are hit by a cyber attack or a malware breach, you have to report that to the relevant authority within 24 hours. Okay. That's an initial report. Who do I report it to? So within NIS2, there are basically what they're calling CSIRTs, Computer Security Incident Response Teams. And there are at least 2 CSIRTs for every EU country. Within the UK, it is likely that in the event of malware incidents, malware breach, security breaches, anything like that, that you'll be reporting it to the National Cybersecurity Centre, the NCSC, who are the lead organisation in this. And for those of you who don't know, the NCSC are part of GCHQ, so part of Spook Central. Okay. So again, that reporting requirement has increased significantly. Personal data breach under GDPR, report within 72 hours. You get hit by a malware attack, report that to the NCSC within 24 hours. Okay. Training and awareness. So again, regular training for employees on cybersecurity best practices, initiatives to raise awareness about cybersecurity threats and measures. So you can sit down, you can spend hours and hours creating all of these very, very good policies. You can put all of these security mechanisms in place. But again, you can be held accountable if your staff don't know anything about those. Okay. So obviously ADM, we offer know before. Other systems are available. And what know before allows us to do is we can publish all of our relevant information security policies to all of our staff. Now, unless we stand over them, looking at them, we can't make sure they actually read them. But with know before and systems like it, we can at least say they've said they've read it, which from our point of view, from a compliance thing is, well, you said you read it. End of story. Okay. Compliance and reporting, regular audits to ensure compliance with the directives. So again, this is all stuff that you will end up having to do internally. But how often and how onerous these are will depend entirely on your company and your organization. Within ADM, say we're 27,001, 9,001 plus 14,001 for environment. We have a monthly review meeting on all of those 3 subjects. Okay. You may not need that. If we're just talking about basic information policies, you may review those on a quarterly basis, whatever. Okay. So this is where I touched on who manages this. So each government manages its own implementation of NIS2. I stated about the computer security incident response teams, and the UK CSIRT is expected to be at the National Cybersecurity Centre. Again, we're saying here, incidents must be reported within 24 hours, including ransomware attacks. Penalties associated with NIS2. So, again, if we go back to our essential and important entities, you can look at the scale of some of these penalties. Maximum fine, 10 million euros or 2% of worldwide turnover. Maximum fine, 7 million euros, 1.4% of annual turnover. One of the fines that has been released that will be in place, that I don't think will apply to anyone here, but it could potentially apply to ADM, is under the UK Cyber Resilience Bill, managed service providers such as us, if we report a breach, not only can we be fined for the breach having happened, but we can be fined £100,000 a day for each day that breach is not resolved and fixed. Okay, so there are some very, very huge penalties in line with this. So that's pretty much what I was going to cover in this. There's a couple of links here that may be quite useful if we send those through. They'll be part of this statement here, the cybersecurity and resilience policy statement and the comparison of NIS2 versus the UK Cybersecurity Act. But what I'm just going to do, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second and I'll just show you a couple of things that we've done within ADM. So bear with me 2 seconds.
Andy, there's a question from Andrew in the chat. If you could take a quick look at that as well.
Yeah, let's have a look. Yep, spot on. So, that is one of the things that we are offering internally. So you'll see very, very shortly what our initial starting point is. But exactly. So it's a discussion that our sales account managers and the service delivery managers within ADM will be having with our customers moving forwards. Okay. So thank you for that, Andrew. That's really, really good. Right, so just alluding to what Andrew mentioned in the chat there. So if I just share this as well. So as an example, this is basically how we at ADM have looked at the requirements and how we comply with them. So down here, we've got the 10 requirements of NIS2 and what we're assuming will be the same requirements of the UK Cyber Resilience Act. And over here are the documented measures that we have so that we can demonstrate that we comply with these. So, Andrew, one of the first things we would do would be to actually sit down with yourself across all of your responsible organisations and go through these. Point one, have you got a responsible person for cybersecurity? Do you have a cybersecurity strategy? Do you have risk assessment? Do you have incident management? Do you have business continuity plans? If you do, great. We can note them down in here. And this is the first stage. Okay. The first stage is identifying where you have policies and mechanisms already in place and where you don't. Okay. But as I say, we've gone through this internally at ADM, and we are confident that we demonstrate compliance with NIS2, and we will demonstrate compliance with the UK Cyber Resilience Bill. And the primary thing is because literally all of these control measures that we have here, continuity plan, process diagrams, server security policies, file transfer policies, all of these various things we have in place, and they're all certified that we have them from ISO 9001, 27001 and CE+. So it is a fact that if you have those certifications, you're in a very, very good place to demonstrate that you have these, that you comply with these requirements. I'm seeing an increasing amount of posts popping up on LinkedIn where it is saying this very, very same thing. Okay, so again, we are not, as ADM, we are not an organizer. So obviously we can get you through C and CE+. We won't get you through 27001. For example, we use the British Assessment Bureau for that, but we can advise you on where you need to go and the journey you need to take to get there. We're happy to share redacted copies of our policies and procedures, subject to director level non-disclosure agreements being signed. Okay. But this is very much what the first stage of those conversations would be with our customers when it. Okay. And just going to stop sharing this for a second again. And just one last thing I want to show. So again, and again, we can help advise and start you off on this. One of the key things before you look at any measures you implement is to actually look at risk. Okay, so how do you do that? So this is a very, very basic example. Okay. And this is a very basic, just Excel template. Other variations are available of a risk management. So we look here. What is the risk? Is there a known vulnerability of it? How vulnerable are you? So got two key differences here. So the vulnerability is how open you are to something you know about. Okay. Probability, how likely is it to occur? The impact, how serious is it? And again, we can help you by sitting down and starting going through all of this. Okay. This is a very, very basic example, but it's the sort of thing that we can assist in building up with. Okay. I'm just going to stop sharing there. That is pretty much all I was going to cover in this. So thank you very much. If you have got any more questions, please drop them in the chat here. Andrew, yes, the webinar link will be available, so that will be shared with anybody who wants it. Isaac, I'm sure at some point we'll be running this again in the future.
Yeah, I imagine so. It's quite a popular topic at the moment, isn't it?
Definitely. But yeah, just before we end, I just would like to stress again that even though, excuse me, even though you may feel that this doesn't apply to you by the letter of what it's saying. Everything that it says you should be doing is everything we consider as best practice. Okay. And, you should start thinking about this now. Okay. Whether you want to think about it by having initial conversations with us, absolutely fine. We can, provide that. But do start thinking about it, because what you don't want to happen is it becomes in law this time next year, and all of a sudden you think, oh, I haven't got this, I haven't got that, I haven't got this. And your customers start asking you for stuff like that. So, start thinking about it now. Let's start having discussions about it now. If you want to come to us for discussions, as I say, we're more than happy to, have more, in-depth discussions. I can, come to you guys. We can have Teams meetings, whatever, however you want to play it. But yeah, if you want to take it any further, obviously probably reach out via your account manager in the first instance. But yeah, that's all I've got to say. So thank you very much for your time. Just over to you, Isaac. Anything to round up with?
Yeah, just a quick one, really. If you don't have an account manager with us, then do contact us on 01227 473 500. That's 01227 473 500. Alternatively, you can drop us an email to sales@adm-computing.co.uk. That's sales@adm-computing.co.uk. Hope you all enjoyed, and thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time again. Nice one. Hope to speak to you all soon. Thank you.